Makarand, may I request you please to first make some opening remarks and set the stage for discussion, and then we'll go into especially what I think is quite a remarkable book. I had, I read it last night, speed read it, and it's on JNU, it's on the uncivil war. It's quite remarkable because I think it's like a manifesto for how a higher education institution should be run and what really can go wrong sometimes as well with the best intentions. And what do we do? How do we really use the potential of young people and not destroy it by your 5 Bs, which you will, of course, talk about. Thank you very much. Would you like to come to the podium? Or? Okay, great.
Thank you so much, Kaveree. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Mr. Prabhu Chawla, the Indian Express Group, as well as the sponsors, and thanks to the young friends at the back who've been listening so patiently. It's great to be here. Congratulations on the 10th anniversary of this important summit. Last year I was able to join virtually, and it's good to be back. So just a few preliminary remarks, as you suggested. Now, I had a graphic here of the Indian students who are abroad. I don't know where it is, but I wanted to start with that. Okay, great. I wanted to start with that because everybody's been talking about our students in Ukraine. So just look at this. Now, if you look at the graphic, it was the question asked in Parliament to the Minister of State for External Affairs, Mr. P. Muralidharan. Can you please, yeah, there you go. So it's 133,000 students of ours are abroad. And you'll see the usual places, Canada, US. In fact, at one time, the US alone had 500,000 Indian students. Obviously, it's come back because of COVID. But if you again look at the graphic, I find it really fascinating. So there is Canada.
Can you just hold the graphic there, please?
Just for 2 minutes, if you don't mind.
So that he can explain it.
Please. So if you just look at it, there's about 250.
There it is. Just hold it, please.
Yeah, 215,000 students in Canada, then the US, 211,000, and UK has about 44,000 students, if I remember right, and so on. Now, there are just two things I wanted to stress there. The first thing which we have to keep in mind is that if you take an average cost of $20,000 per student and you multiply it by 1.133 million, you have a staggering figure of 170,000 crores, something like that. You just do your math. Okay, 170,000 crores. Now that's enough to fund, or 150,000 crores. So in other words, 1.5 lakh thousand crores. In other words, it's enough to fund 3,000 universities of 500 crores each. Manish ji was talking about a medical college being worth 200 crores. But even if your annual budget is 500 crores, you can fund 3,000 universities. I was the director of Indian Institute of Advanced Study. Our budget was 30 crores. You could do 5,000 institutes of advanced studies. So what we are doing is we are exporting people, right? And why are we exporting people? That's the question to ask. And let's also add the amount of money the central government spends, which is about 80,000 crores. And if you add all the states together, you know, UP alone spends more than 100,000 crores on education. You add, the figures are staggering, but our output is nowhere commensurate with the amount of money we've put into education. And we don't have a single university in the top 100. We have not produced a single Nobel laureate after independence, except Mother Teresa, who's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, not in science, not in arts, not in any other discipline. Our economics Nobel laureate works from MIT, Abhijit Banerjee.
But he's from JNU.
He's from JNU. We're very proud of him, you know. But I'm saying we export human beings. We export manpower and woman power and mind power. So what we've got in India is a system where, you know, what if I may be blunt, and I don't want to offend anybody, we have a competence deficit coupled with a competence phobia. And to end my preliminary remarks, I know we're going to talk about the culture wars in India. I want to quote a statement from, Sri Aurobindo, whose 150th anniversary we are celebrating now. And this is a letter he writes to his younger brother, Barindra, who has been released from jail after the general amnesty. He was sent to life imprisonment in the Andamans. And he writes this long letter, I think it's sometime in April 1920. So it's more than 100 years ago, about 2 years ago. And he says, the main cause of India's weakness is not subjection, nor poverty, nor a lack of spirituality or religion, but a diminution of the power of thought, the spread of ignorance and the birthplace of knowledge. Everywhere I see an inability or unwillingness to think, incapacity of thought or thought phobia. So we have thought phobia, we have competence phobia, and I'm afraid we also have truth phobia. So these are my preliminary remarks.
And we also have the 5 Bs, which you talked about: brainwashing, bullying, browbeating, boycotting, and
finally, bullshit.
Sorry.
So if you want
Sorry for that. But I think that's, when Makarand talks about that, he talks about the kind of cultural and academic environment that he saw and he was very much part of, an unwilling part of, at JNU. And he describes this in great detail in his new book, which I recommend very highly to all of you. It's out, I think, soon. Tomorrow, great. From Rupa.
They couldn't make it.
Yeah, it's such
today.
a pity. But really talk about that whole idea of taking these young people who come from absolutely diverse backgrounds and some so deprived as well. The fact is that JNU is a marvelous institution in terms of the kind of access and opportunities it has also given to people who would have not had that kind of life before, an academic, cultural life. But what happens when these young minds come to this institution and the role that teachers play there? I think that's really quite significant.
So absolutely. So what we've done is we have created an ecosystem where ideology trumps both intelligence and scholastic competence. So it's all about which side you're on,
right.
And you've over-politicized education, especially in the humanities and social studies.
Yeah.
The sciences are luckily a little better. They're a little exempt from this malaise or this disease. So you over-politicize and under-intellectualize education. And I want to say that I'm very optimistic about India, so don't misunderstand me. I mean, we are exploding, as far as the education field goes. I mean, look at the statistics. We have 1,000 universities, 40,000 colleges, and our total enrollment in the education sector is over 250 million. That's more than the entire population of Brazil. And in higher education, that is college and upwards, we have 35 million people. That's the population of Canada. But really, the problem is the quality of education, what we are delivering, Many of our graduates, they are not fit for any job. And even in sciences and engineering, you look at the top hirers, whether it's TCS or Infosys, the degree is just that prerequisite. Then they have their own training. So there's something wrong somewhere. And I feel, and I dare say this, that I was going back to this Ukraine business, everyone's talking about it. Because we are not able to give enough seats to people who want to study, we are pushing them out of the country. And there's a simple reason for it. Every seat is attached to a quota. And when are we going to get, this is the only country in the world, my friends, where there's a quota for everything. There is no quota-free seat in education in India as of today. And there is something dreadfully wrong with this. We have tied ourselves up. Yesterday, the president said we must compete. How can we compete, when we are shackled by this system? So the only way to do it, I'm all for affirmative action. If everything is equal, prefer the underserved, prefer the person who has been discriminated against. But you cannot, have 10 different so-called merit lists or 5 different merit lists and constantly run everything through quotas. We can never become Vishwaguru. I can tell you that if we continue this system. So when it comes to JNU, I mean, what do we see? What we see is an entire campus which was used, I mean, my book documents it, as a platform against the Narendra Modi government, okay? And they tried to create a India-wide youth movement, like the Navnirman Samiti in Gujarat, which brought a government down, JP's Bihar movement. Of course, they failed, but I don't believe that educational institutions should become political platforms. I think educational institutions are for imparting knowledge and training people. And I think we have, as we heard earlier in the morning, a very exciting opportunity to go to Web 3.0 and digitize our education and really deliver high-quality education to everybody. We can do that. But we need to, and I've proposed in my book that you can have student government, like IITs do, but not student politics.
Yeah, but you're also not of the persuasion of extremes. You talk about the mid path. And I think that's also significant because the failure of the left is also in a way mirrored in the right. You propose a new kind of nationalism, both politically and culturally. Now, this is something that when you talk about the Narendra Modi government, perhaps they also don't quite buy into this middle path. Would you like to talk a little about what is the kind of nationalism, what is the kind of academic and cultural environment that should be there, which isn't necessarily followed by both the left and the right?
Exactly. See, I don't think that left intolerance should be substituted by right intolerance. It's a no-win, zero-sum game if we play it that way. But, I mean, obviously we need an education system which is, true to our civilizational genius. It's not teaching us to despise ourselves and see ourselves as repositories of superstition and ignorance and backwardness. Having said that, if you talk to me about nationalism, I have a very simple formula for young people. Our nationalism shouldn't be very thick-skinned, like some of our neighbors, where no matter, what the world says or, we don't care about anybody, we just suppress whoever we like, we become autocratic. I mean, I think in India we suffer from China envy. We shouldn't. We can't be like them. We can't be centralized. We can't have one language everywhere, etc.
We don't want to be
We don't want to be like that, correct. So I call that thick-skinned nationalism, that the government or the authorities will do what they want regardless of what anybody says or thinks. So you steamroller everybody, so it's only the iron fist. Nor do I think we should have a very thin-skinned nationalism, so that anytime anybody criticizes anybody, say the government, they'll say, oh, you're anti-national.
Yeah.
No, why can't I criticize my government? Why can't I elected them?
And that famous phrase of Tukre Tukre gang.
Oh, well, the Tukre Tukre gang is somebody I opposed. Let me tell you, I mean,
You've seen it in action, but may not necessarily want to call it that.
Yeah, I'm just saying that, look, the entire faculty, I mean, there was this nationalism series, and I was the only one who stood up against a famous student leader and asked him some questions, and they tried to sabotage my speech. Now, I asked, where were these so-called nationalist students then? Nobody was there. I was alone standing there. So I've seen this. So my only point is your nationalism can't be so thin-skinned that you're intolerant even of constructive criticism. How will you do Atmanirikshan, Anvikshiki? How will you understand, where we made mistakes. So you can't say that anybody who has anything, to question or of positive statements is just dubbed anti-national. No, everybody is not an anti-national. We all love India. So my point is, you ask, what's the middle path?
Yeah.
Your nationalism shouldn't be so thick-skinned that you stamp out all dissent. Your nationalism shouldn't be so thin-skinned, you're so touchy, that anybody who criticizes you, you'll say, oh, you're anti-national. Right. So, we should have a vibrant and open society, not a polarized polity and a polarized civil society where, the middle ground of discussion and debate and learning from each other is completely destroyed. And unfortunately, it seems like that. It seems as if we have become this polarized society. And one reason for that is that there is no, I think that openness and compassionate space to listen to each other. What's wrong with listening to different points of view?
In fact, you talk about the restoration of civil disagreement and dialogue, and not bitter opposition nor irreconcilable conflict. And I loved your other definition of nationalism, which is non-aggressive autonomy in politics and non-exclusionism in culture.
Exactly.
Very well put.
I tell people, like, okay, the liberals, the so-called liberals today are the most illiberal because, they think that anybody who doesn't agree with them is intolerant. So we have a war of two competing kinds of intolerance. But India is the real home of liberalism. Why? Because our liberalism was not just, physical or social or emotional or intellectual. We had a spiritual democracy. You could follow any path. You wouldn't be stoned for it. And, we are the home of because what is liberalism? It's freedom, it's moksha, it's mukti. For me, liberalism is that. This is the only civilization which says you can have jivan mukti, you can be sthita prajna, you can have moksha. So you're liberating yourself from suffering, from physical and mental constraints. I think that expanded brahad, that expanded consciousness, and the society which respects it is true liberalism. And see, you've come from Kashmir, and I just saw this movie. It's dreadful what has happened. So we are in a civilizational war, which
in fact, JNU stars in that as well.
Of course. And that's what I'm saying. I was also part of that in some respect for standing up against those forces, because I asked very simple questions. I said, you talk about Azadi, fine. What did you do when the Kashmiri Pandits were driven out in 1990? They did nothing. There was not a single procession. Some of us, I know, young children were in camps, and we raised, they needed grain, they needed basically rice bags. So we did that on our own, but where were all these JNU Student Association, JNU Teachers Association, Union? Nothing. The whole thing was erased. So this selective protest, which is only against a particular dispensation or against the Indian state, the Indian state is blamed for all the wrongs, okay? But when in your own country, certain people are driven out, and what was their fault? Just because they were Hindus, they got driven out? That's terrible. So you say, oh, minorities shouldn't be treated badly. I completely agree. How will you test that proposition? See how the minorities treat their own minorities. So I'm just saying, so there are two sides to this whole question of culture wars. One side is we want an open society, with freedom and, dialogue. On the other side, we are in a civilizational war. Let's not forget, we are surrounded by hostile forces. There are two nuclear powers on two sides of our borders. And we can't afford to have a weak India, a weak state, and a divided civil society where North versus South, East versus West, all this caste wars and social class conflict. No, why? Why do we need this divisive narrative, being forced upon us day in and day out?
Especially on young people who
Young people,
may
see,
not know better.
language, culture, religion. Why are these divisive? I don't see that at all. I mean, I don't see the need for that at all. Why should one be incompatible with the other, you know? I mean, we saw beautifully, we have Jana Gana Mana and we have the Tamil national anthem. What's wrong with that? That's beautiful. So every part of India can be like that. They can have without being constantly at war. But, so in other words, I'm saying when it comes to the young people, when it comes to education, we should separate politics, you know, from knowledge. And we should be free of prejudice, you know, in India, and free of these divisive narratives, and see, instead of Bharat, you know, Todo, let's have a Bharat Jodo, you know. And frankly, I've never felt out of place in any part of India. You know, and in fact, I don't feel out of place in any part of the world. I've traveled to more than 50 countries, in fact, more than that. But you know, Swadesho Bhuvanatrayam, all the three worlds are my home. You know, this is what we believe in India. So there's no insider, outsider, local, non-local. See, these are manufactured to divide us. But I think there's space for everyone.
There's space for decent dissent.
Absolutely.
I think that is the sum of the argument. And as I said, I again recommend highly that you read his book. JNU, Nationalism and India's Uncivil War. And of course, listen if you want to again to our discussion. Thank you very much, Makarand, for being so patient and always being so eloquent.
Thank you, Kaveree. It was a pleasure. Thank you.